Ladies and gentlemen, I really do want to thank the panel. Jim Kibler wins the Furthest Away Award coming from Atlanta. And thank you for being here to discuss one of the seminal issues that face the United States, and that's how to provide energy in an environmentally responsible way to power our lives. Because at the end of the day, every one of us need electricity that's affordable and environmentally balanced. And as we are changing energy policy in the United States, we're struggling to find that balance. So in that regard, I'd like to introduce the panel. The first one is Mary Martin. You want to say a few words?
Sure. Hi, I'm Mary Martin with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. I do energy and environmental regulatory work at the Chamber, and I'm glad to be here.
Mark?
Mark Dempsey, I'm Vice President of Appalachian Power. Appalachian is a wholly owned subsidiary of American Electric Power, AEP. Our service territory is South Central and Southwestern Virginia, as well as Southern West Virginia.
My name is Pam Faggard. I'm Vice President and Chief Environmental Officer for Dominion Resources, and we know we need to be part of the solution for compliance with the Clean Power Plan.
I'm Jim Kibler. I'm with AGL Resources in Atlanta. We operate utilities in 7 states that literally stretch from Miami to Manhattan and west to Iowa. It's a very diverse group of service territories. One of our subsidiaries is Virginia Natural Gas, which is the oldest corporation in Virginia, and its service territory stretches from the Richmond suburbs to Virginia Beach.
Thank you. Mary, since you work for the U.S. Chamber, and I have to tell you I appreciate the U.S. Chamber's role in bringing these mega issues to the front, standing in front of Congress and testifying the impact on businesses. And so with that, could you discuss your concern with compliance with the Clean Power Plan that the Governor mentioned this morning?
Sure. I would say obviously affordability and reliability are some of the top concerns that we have with the proposed Clean Power Plan. We've also at the Chamber, in the comments that we filed along with several other trade associations, addressed some of the legal issues with the Clean Power Plan. We have serious concerns with what EPA is doing here and the overreach that's being at least sought, that they're seeking to do with the Clean Power Plan, and going beyond their authority under the Clean Air Act. A couple of fronts on that. One is, this is getting a little in the weeds, but there's Section 111D and Section 112. The Clean Power Plan proposal is being done under Section 111D of the Clean Air Act. Utility MACT, which is a previous air regulation on power plants, was done under Section 112. The business community as well as states are pushing an argument that you can't regulate power plants under both Section 111D and Section 112. It's very timely right now. That argument is actually going to be going before the D.C. Circuit Court on Thursday, April 16th this week. So it'll be interesting to see what happens on that front and whether or not the Clean Power Plan may not be legal under that argument. Another argument that we've looked at too is that EPA seems to be trying to regulate beyond the fence line, is how we phrase it, with the Clean Power Plan. Under Section 111D, they're really supposed to only be focusing on emissions reductions that they can do at the source. But as you all probably know, the Clean Power Plan involves 4 building blocks that go well beyond just the EGU sources. So we also, in our comments, talked a lot about that as an issue, that they shouldn't be going beyond the fence line for this. We have concerns that this is going to set precedential effects for going forward, and not just in the utility industry, but other industries that could later be facing regulations for greenhouse gas emissions.
Thanks. Mark, you want to comment?
Well, David, our biggest concern, of course, is the affordability part of it for our customers. But as far as the practical standpoint, I think probably the biggest problem in the rule, other than the myriad legal issues that are involved in how that will wash out eventually, is the timeline. Especially the 2020 interim goals timeline is just simply not doable. The rule isn't final yet. Perhaps we'll see some changes there. But if you look at where we're at practically mid-2015 right now. The states will have a year to 2 years to develop their plan once the federal plan is out there. Then, after they submit their plan, the federal EPA will have another year to evaluate and approve those plans, which puts us down probably to around 2018 timeline somewhere to start meeting 2020 goals. And this is going to be hugely problematic and frankly not doable.
Pam?
Sure. Dominion could be supportive of a national carbon reduction program, provided it allowed the nation's electric providers to continue to provide electricity reliably and at reasonable rates. And unfortunately, we believe the Clean Power Plan as proposed falls short of those goals. Like many of you, we submitted comments. We believe the emission limits are too stringent, and we believe the dates are too soon, too much too soon. We believe specifically with regard to Virginia, the rates are unreasonable and unfair, creating a potential competitive disadvantages to those of us in Virginia compared to neighboring states. For example, Virginia's standard is 810 pounds per megawatt hour. The standard in West Virginia is 1620, twice as high. One of the many advantages of doing business in Virginia is our very competitive electric rates, and it's important to all of us that we preserve those. Regardless, though, of how the rule turns out, I think it's fair to say there will be a change in our generation mix. We're moving away from coal and towards other sources of generation, for example, natural gas. It's important to increase our ability to receive cost-effective natural gas in Virginia. For example, Dominion's Atlantic Coast Pipeline, we think, is a great project that will help us achieve compliance with the Clean Power Plan, as well as North Carolina's industry achieve compliance with that plan. We also expect to have more renewables. As you know, right now the percentage of renewables in Virginia is very low, a couple of percent, and that needs to increase significantly. EPA assumes 16% by 2030 in the draft Clean Power Plan, and that's probably way too ambitious, but we are going to be seeing more renewables. This year in Virginia's General Assembly session, the General Assembly voted to find 400 megawatts of solar to be in the best interests of the Commonwealth, which means we'll probably be moving forward with those projects. But 400 megawatts, well, it's a wonderful objective. With solar only provides energy about 20% of the time, so that's equivalent to about 80 megawatts of baseload energy. So in other words, while it's a good start, it is still a very small number and nowhere near 16% of our state's energy mix. We are also looking at offshore wind, working to see if we can find ways to make it more economic because it is very expensive, and moving forward with new natural gas, as I mentioned earlier.
Thanks. Jim?
The thing that really troubles me the most about the Clean Power Plan is the way that it punishes early adopters, like states like Virginia and Dominion and AEP, who have made real investments in improving emissions over time, and the Clean Power Rule doesn't recognize that. It instead imposes a stretch goal on states like Virginia that are really leading the way in terms of introducing diversity in the portfolio. So that's the troubling factor. EPA has taken a different tack on the methane emission rule or the blueprint that it's released in February around natural gas value chain emissions, where it's really more focused on a performance standard that's looking at reductions of about 40% in the value chain from the wellhead to the burner tip by 2025. It is an ambitious goal, but it's doable because the gas framework that EPA has released is much more flexible and allows the industry to focus on those high emitting sources within the value chain first. The most cost-effective achievements we can make very early on for relatively low cost. And most of those can be achieved for less than $5 a decatherm, which is right about the cost of natural gas today. So if EPA had taken the same approach with the electric sector, we might have a better overall result for consumers, more cost-effective certainly, but unfortunately that's not the approach EPA took.
Thanks. Mark, AEP is a coal-heavy major utility. What do you think is the future of coal and the power mix going forward as these new rules get ground in?
Well, I think coal certainly stays in the mix, David, and I don't know what that final percentage is going to be, but certainly we've just spent billions of dollars on several of our plants being fully compliant with all the other environmental regulations, and it would be foolish to force a situation where that investment is almost immediately wasted. So we certainly see coal, well, and the other thing about it is there's nothing to replace it with. We too are going more towards natural gas, but keep in mind natural gas isn't doable everywhere. You've got to have pipelines, such as the one.
Working on it.
Yeah, I know you are. You have to have those, but also power plants can't just be lined up in some remote corner of the world. You've got transmission projects to get that power distributed across the region, and then the power plants themselves have to be strategically located as well. So we think coal, while it will go down in its percentage of the mix, we do foresee coal being a strong part of the generation mix for many years to come.
Appreciate it. Pam, you mentioned it in your initial comments. What do you see the role of renewables going forward, considering the cost benefit? When, like you said, 20%, for solar.
Yes, you alluded to it, and an important thing is the renewable energy is generally more expensive than other forms of electrical power generation. And so the challenge is to increase the percentage of our generation mixes that are renewable while keeping a handle on the costs. With that said, I agree there is going to be less coal and more renewables. I expect there to see more solar, perhaps some more wind. Dominion has already converted 3 of its coal-fired power plants to renewable biomass energy, so that's an important source of renewable energy here in Virginia. So I do expect the percentage of renewable energy to increase significantly over where it currently is, and the percentage of coal to decrease. But I also agree with what my colleague from AEP said, is there will continue to be a diverse supply of generation here in Virginia.
I agree. Jim, I know you get this question all the time about fracking and and the revolution, and I can't understand. It's just can't overstate it. Energy revolution in the United States has been generated by fracking. Where do you see that going, and can it be done environmentally safe?
It absolutely can be done in an environmentally safe manner. Before I joined our company, I represented the Virginia Oil and Gas Association here in Virginia. Most people don't recognize that Virginia led the way with the Gas and Oil Act of 1990 to develop a strong regulatory framework. Most of the rules that the federal government has adopted since that time were based on rules adopted by the Division of Gas and Oil, including really stringent measures for protecting groundwater and other resources that Virginia operators have done a marvelous job of implementing. Most people don't realize that there have been about 1 million frac jobs in the United States over the last 3 decades, with not one single proven incidence of groundwater contamination from that well operation. Now, it's incredibly important, though, to recognize that, as with any intensive operation, oil and gas, nuclear, automobile manufacturing, anything that is a manufacturing process, there is an opportunity for things to go wrong. And that's why all of these operators use fail-safes, second and third level backups in case there is a failure, a mechanical failure, or there's human error. The Colorado School of the Mines released last week its updated resource assessment about the amount of gas that's in place in America. And for the 5th consecutive time, they've increased their assessment of the amount of reserves that America has. And that's not necessarily because of we're finding more gas or more resources. That resource base is largely known. But what we're finding is technology is improving at 2 to 3 or 4x. The improvement curve on technology is so steep that we're finding the way to generate, to develop those reserves we've known about for a long time at a very cost-effective and environmentally efficient manner. A well pad that's maybe 10 acres in size today can drill 8 to 10 times more wells than one 15 years ago because of the combination of horizontal directional drilling. One wellbore can spread out like a spider web over acres and acres and acres and complete large amount of frac jobs, mini frac jobs throughout that 80 or 120 acre well site at a fraction of the former cost, at a fraction of the surface impacts, and using technology that is rapidly improving. If you want to think about that in terms of how it affects everyday consumers, our customers are seeing anywhere from $800 to $1,200 a year in energy savings since the advent of the shale revolution. If you're a low-income customer, that's about the average benefit under the Low-Income Heating and Energy Assistance Program paid for by the federal government. But it's a benefit that is inured to every consumer in America and not just those who are low income, and it's done without a tax. It's purely because of the American ingenuity that has developed this vast resource. We produced more oil and gas last year as a nation than any country on earth. And for those of you who were products of the 1970s the way I was, that's a pretty amazing thing. And so we need to focus on continual improvement. We can't rest on our laurels, but I think that the track record is one to show that the technology is improving rapidly every day, and safety is a fundamental objective of the value chain. It starts and ends with safety every day. So I'm very proud of the track record of the natural gas value chain, and I think we've got even more benefits to offer the American economy going forward.
Thanks. And that is, one last observation as a moderator, point of privilege, Delegate O'Bannon. The thing that is really bothersome to all of us, and the thing that you cannot count on, is that we don't know the economic impact of the Clean Power Plan. It is the most complicated rule ever proposed in regulatory history in the United States. And that's a quote. The problem that we are incurring in this industry is just one rule. Right on the heels is the ozone rule. Right on that is the MATS rule, and that's mercury. Right on that is the waters of the United States rule. None of these rules, and all of them, major physical impacts on you as a consumer of electricity. You know, your daughters, your sons, your retired individuals, who's struggling with medical bills and drugs, and now you're going to throw in the electricity bill. These rules can double or triple your personal bill that comes in the mail every month. You've got to pay attention to it, because none of these rules have been implemented. They won't be implemented until Obama leaves office, and then they're going to start pancaking on top of each other unless we get active and as businesses realize that we can get the policy wrong. And you have to look no further than Europe, and it's what's happened in Germany and Spain. I mean, Germany just announced 26 new coal plants after spending multi-billions of dollars to do away with, quote-unquote, carbon-intense utility generation. The company started to move. There's no major expansion in Germany anymore. It's all overseas because they can't be competitive with 39 cents a kilowatt hour. Here you pay about 9 to 10 cents. Moving on. We're going to bring it back down. That was kind of the national overview. We're going to bring it down to Virginia. And Pam, this one is for you. Most states have a diverse fuel mix, but Virginia really believes in it. We believe in all the above, from coal to nuclear to wind to solar, offshore. How do we compare to other states? And how was this factored into the EPA draft goals? I know that it's kind of esoteric, but as was said by Pam, these goals were set. We get no credit for any of our nuclear and all the improvements that we made. So how do you think that when they were sitting down in Washington, D.C., did the EPA draft these goals and make it so that none of this stuff was done and taken advantage of? I mean, do you have any insight on why that happened?
I'd like to start with the beginning of your question. We're very proud of the diversity of our fuel mix here in Virginia, and we think it contributes to our reliability and low electric prices. For example, nearly half of our electricity comes from nuclear generation. We have 4 nuclear power plants here in Virginia. and they're doing a great job. Now, the Clean Power Plan, as you alluded to, does not allow you to take credit for your existing nuclear power plants, and we believe that that's not a good assumption. Dominion's carbon intensity, the amount of carbon we have been per megawatt hour produced, is in the best third of the nation. We already have very clean generation. But if you look at the way the Clean Power Plan does the math, they extract, subtract, do not include nuclear generation. And we believe that the plan should be revised to give us credit for uprates we've already made in nuclear generation, and certainly to give us credit for things like new nuclear generation. In another state, a company that's building a new nuclear reactor does not get to take credit for that one either, because it had already been announced at the time the Clean Power Plan was drafted. Similarly, here in Virginia, 2 of our combined cycle power stations, Warren and Brunswick, because they were already underway at the time the Clean Power Plan was drafted, we did not get to take credit for them, if you will, in terms of achieving our end target. And we believe that assumption needs to be reversed in the final plan. Also, with regard to nuclear, we believe that any uprates going forward, in addition to uprates recently achieved, should be credited to the state. We also believe that if we extend our licenses when they expire, that should be treated as if it were new nuclear generation in the state, so that the plan reflects reality. If we're actually generating electricity with no emissions, with nuclear, for example, we believe the plan should give us credit for that, because it is all about your emission rate and not about the type of generation.
Agreed. Mary, does the Clean Power Plan impact all states to the same degree? I think Pam alluded to it, but why is our here in Virginia much stricter than other states? Do you have any insight on as you moved around the country?
Right. Well, I mean, EPA set the reduction rates for each state based on looking at the 4 building blocks, what type of fuel mix they had, the potential to convert to natural gas, the potential to add renewables on, and also on the demand side, energy efficiency programs. So it is, I mean, there are states, Pam had the stats on West Virginia versus Virginia, that do appear to be pretty skewed in the numbers. And so, I mean, I think it's something that a lot of states who have been impacted much more heavily have gone to the agency for and talked to them and expressed serious concerns about it. And a lot of it goes back to early action and getting credit in the nuclear, getting credit for those types of fuel.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. Mark, you move around in your system in Virginia, West Virginia, and you talk to your peers. How do our electricity rates compare to our surrounding states? And will the Clean Power Plan as proposed is going to affect our competitiveness? And what do you think the impact of economic development in Virginia is going to be if this thing goes in as proposed?
Well, David, I'll answer that specifically for APCO. Over the course of the last 8 years or so, we've gone from about 5 cents a kilowatt hour for our average residential customer to somewhere around 11 cents a kilowatt hour for our average residential customer. So there's already been a substantial short-term massive increase in rates for us. With that said, the same thing has happened to everyone else. That we continue to be contacted by industries interested in locating in our part of the world, primarily because of our competitive rates. Although we've gone up, in our view, pretty massively in a short period of time, we are still very competitive. I know that Dominion and our rates are very, very close, so we are less than the national average for power, so it is a big factor in attracting business and industry. So we're still in a pretty good spot, and as you've already mentioned, none of us knows what the impact of this is going to be financially, other than it'll be big.
Plan accordingly, ladies and gentlemen. Jim, one of the things that I've heard that a lot of people have come to me as the utility, think of the utility industry as a super tanker that's starting to turn, its energy mix. you've talked about the fracking of natural gas, but one of the things that we are really starting to focus in is, gas companies having a monopoly. Do you see that being a danger going forward, or do you think that because of the fracking revolution that there's going to be plentiful enough gas to make those supplies plentifully available to everybody, and we're not going to face a monopoly situation?
Without question, we have got an adequate and abundant resource base to fuel the nation. But that doesn't mean we should make foolish decisions about how we use that fuel. I think it would be foolish to completely abandon coal, nuclear, or any other option. I mean, natural gas should not become preferred baseload power source. Secretary Bodman, former energy secretary, was once asked, what do you think about natural gas as a power generation fuel? And he said, well, I kind of like it, but you could also wash your dishes with scotch. But why would you want to? I mean, there are so many other competing uses for natural gas that we have to make sure that we are making the right resource decisions about how we use it. I'm actually, though, less concerned about a lack of abundance than I am about the availability to share that abundance with every American, no matter where they're located. The single greatest constraint we have at the moment, even in Virginia, which is resource rich, with abundant supplies, natural gas supplies of its own, the single greatest problem we have right now is a lack of transmission capacity into growing market areas in Virginia and into areas that want to grow. And that's why our company is subscribed to the Atlantic Coast Pipeline, why we support it. It is, I agree with the governor 100%, the Atlantic Coast Pipeline is a game changer. It is not just a game changer for Virginia, it is a game changer for the Mid-Atlantic. This winter, Virginia Natural Gas saw its record consumption on February 18th, I believe was the date. About 1.5 times more gas flowed that day than on our typical winter day. And even though V&G invested $150 million a few years ago to build a pipeline under the Hampton Roads Channel to bring 100,000 decatherms a day of gas into Southampton Roads, V&G had to curtail all 108 of its manufacturing customers in the middle of February. Now, interruptible customers, they pay interruptible rates. They don't pay firm rates. But if there were a large industrial customer who wanted firm supply east of Richmond today, I don't believe that's possible without the Atlantic Coast Pipeline. So if you do nothing else after today, nothing else at all, and you want a vibrant economy for Virginia, I encourage you to write your 2 United States senators and to write the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission and express your support for the Atlantic Coast Pipeline, for the other pipeline, the Mountain Valley Project, and for any infrastructure that will provide access to the Utica and Marcellus shale gas for Virginia. It's the single most important thing you could do.
Thank you. We're going to wrap it up. We're getting close to our time frame because we're going to allow some questions. But one of the things I'm going to ask Mary is, how do you, in your professional opinion, not to be held responsible, how do you anticipate, and what do you anticipate happening regarding the proposed ozone standards that's coming down the pipe?
Sure. So right now, EPA has put out a proposal to lower the current ozone standard. Right now it's 75 parts per billion. They took comment on lowering anywhere from 65 to 70 parts per billion. And with ozone, if you're not in compliance with the standard, you're in what we call non-attainment, which can be the equivalent of a death knell, as you may put it, as far as economic development goes. It makes it very difficult to build new facilities, expand facilities, get air permits. It can even start to get into highway funding and dollars. So it's a very serious rule, and the fact that they're lowering it down to something maybe as low as 65, you're starting to impact a huge area of the country and areas that haven't had ozone issues before. So it's something that the business community as a whole is very engaged on the issue. Obviously the Clean Power Plan, Waters of the U.S., ozone are kind of the big three environmental issues right now. But as far as putting a number on it, 65. They originally, I will say, originally they were looking at 60 to 70. When they actually put the proposal out, they did come up from 65 to 70, and they are taking comment on 75, which would be retaining the standard. So those were sort of minor victories for us in the business community. Who knows what will happen, to be honest, with the number. There's a court order that says they have to finalize the proposal by October 1st. So I know a lot of the business community is going to be heavily engaged on the issue for the next few months, trying to move the needle, both with EPA as well as with the administration, as well as on the federal level. There's legislation out there right now to try and to keep the standard where it is until all of the country can come into attainment, and the 2008, the current standard, can be implemented.
Thank you. Pam, you've worked in this field. You've bled in the stony fields of Virginia's regulatory. And if you had the power, President Pam, what is the one change to the Clean Power Plan that you would say would have the least impact on us as businesses? And what would you change about that plan? Sure.
The first thing I'd do is make a more reasonable rate for Virginia. Virginia's rate is, I already mentioned it. It's not justifiable, and it's unfair compared to our neighboring states. It's half of our neighboring state, West Virginia. We must get that number changed. I feel confident that with the comments everybody submitted to EPA, that EPA will consider and revise the number. But that is the number one most important thing. So I've got a list of 100, but that's first.
Thank you, ma'am. And finally, Mary, one of the things that all this translates into is cost. I mean, the United States has prospered because we have cheap energy. And if you look at the growth of our GNP and the growth of energy, they're exactly parallel. You cannot have a quality of life without affordable energy. And by the way, just a little factoid, 1/3 of the planet has never seen electricity. And those thirds are in abject poverty. So electricity is critical to society. It's critical to our health. It's critical all the way, in what we do every day. How do we preserve the reliability? And by the way, if you want to be in one of our, and Pam can testify, and when you have an outage, people are very patient the first 60 minutes. And you let the second hour come in, and you'll start seeing that call rate go up like that, make it 3 hours, and it's going up almost like 80%. It's out of the roof. That's the kind of reliability we experience. But we have spent 100 years perfecting this system that we call electricity. From delivery, how to burn it, how to do it cleaner, and it gets cleaner every year. So at the end of the day, Marie, all these rules that you know about and you've dealt with, how do we get stable rates and reliability out of these things where the average person can afford the electricity bill? Easy.
You're right, exactly. Easy question. I think there's a real concern that all of these rules coming together is going to lead to rates that aren't affordable, that the electricity isn't as reliable, that America isn't as competitive when it comes to business and economic development, that we may reach some type of breaking point at some point. I think the business community has always done a really good job of absorbing these different regulations, dealing with them, and finding a way to make them work. But I think at some point, especially with sort of this big three we have right now with the Clean Power Plan, Waters of the U.S., and Ozone, we could very well come to the point where it's going to be more, it's going to be more difficult to find that that balance and that point that makes everything work.
Mark? God, that was a long question. You know, how do we preserve reliability and affordability in this environment?
Well, you know, those are two very difficult things. First of all, on the reliability side of it, you need to be aware that the plants that are already going to be closing this year due to the MATS rule, nothing to do with the Clean Power Plan, has a lot of problems associated with it in the reliability area. We have probably the largest transmission system of any of the electric utilities, and we have modeled and we identified at least 1,000 thermal overload spots on only PJM system just from the MATS. So to the extent we don't know yet how many other power plants will be closing because of the Clean Power Plan, but you know, to throw those in there, there are significant reliability problems facing us already. Now those things can be overcome. There's no question about that. You know, there's projects to be designed, a lot of money spent. We're already spending a lot of money, as is Dominion, on transmission projects to address some of these things. But the reliability is a big concern, and it's related to the timeline. The question you didn't ask me, if we had our choice to change one thing, it would be to put a more doable timeline in place for the Clean Power Plan so you can do things like adequately plan your transmission system and build out and more manageably place that cost on your customers. I want to tell you something shocking. It's affordability part. Right now, we've got 25% of our customers are delinquent, over 30 days delinquent on their power bill. If you throw in the folks that are under 30 days but still delinquent, it's more like 40%. So, you know, we urge that we don't do anything that drastic and sudden. You know, if you can work these things over on a doable timeline and make them more affordable and also have the time to assure the reliability, we think those are two very important things that I won't say they're getting no attention. I think we are being heard at EPA, so it'll be interesting to see when the final rules, and there's two rules and a fifth that'll come out about the same time. I'm hearing around the 1st of August, maybe. Mary, do you know?
I think they've said midsummer 2015, so Labor Day weekend is usually a good window.
At any rate, some point midsummer to early August, we're going to know what these final rules are, and you know, it's our job to provide reliable and affordable power, so we'll get about the business of figuring out how we're going to do that. But unrealistic timelines and putting too much cost on people are going to make this a real problem if that's the way they decide to go.
Yeah, I think we've hit on most of the things. In the nearest term, the top priority has to be to advocate for a more reasonable Clean Power Plan. After we're done advocating with EPA, all of us will work together here in Virginia to help Virginia come up with the best plan for Virginia to implement the EPA rule. Within the energy industry, we've already talked about what's important in operating our units at the most efficient way possible, bringing new supplies of natural gas to Virginia, so we'll have it to help comply with the Clean Power Plan. Exploring new technologies for renewable energy to try to make them as most cost-effective as possible. The good news with regard to solar is it's becoming more cost-effective, still more expensive than conventional forms of generation, but nonetheless improving. And just continuing to work to find cost-effective ways to implement energy efficiency programs. We haven't talked much about that yet, but it is important component of the Clean Power Plan. So working together, I'm confident that while it is likely the prices of electricity will increase, that we can work to make a more reasonable Clean Power Plan to ensure the continued supply of reliable energy here in Virginia.
Jim, you got any comments?
You know, I just think that it's important to recognize the progress that the utility sector has made over the years. I don't think that there's enough credit given for the investments and the improvements in technology. A lot of equipment manufacturers out there today who have driven end-use efficiency rates through the roof. We're a much more efficient nation today than we were even a decade ago. And I just don't think that gets factored into a lot of these plans for rules and regulations. There's a continual squeeze, and while that tends to help technology improve, I think sometimes we tend to go overboard, and it creates disruption in the economy. It creates winners and losers, and consequences that could have been avoided. You know, in the gas side, I don't think most folks realize that end-use efficiency has improved so much that we have 60% more customers today using natural gas as a nation than we had in 1977, and our carbon footprint is the same as it was in 1977. I mean, we meet the Kyoto Protocol, but we have an EPA that wants even further reductions out of our sector. And that's fine, we'll be able to meet those, but business and utilities want to be efficient. We want to deliver good service and good value to our customers. All of the Virginia natural gas utilities have really aggressive energy and conservation programs, rate structures that the General Assembly passed overwhelmingly bipartisan margins under Republican administrations and Democratic administrations. Those rules were developed by the State Corporation Commission, and we're saving customers money today that they might otherwise be spending on something else. But we now have a proposed rule from the Department of Energy on furnace standards that would mandate a 92 AFUE furnace for every home in America. And even DOE's own internal analysis shows that only about 34% of Americans would benefit economically from that rule. And low-income customers are especially disadvantaged because they tend to live in smaller homes and can't justify the $2,000 or $3,000 extra expense that those furnaces are going to require for retrofits. So that rule is going to force decisions about energy usage that are going to make folks take bad choices. They're going to make good short-term decisions and end up using more energy in a less efficient way and have more carbon emissions. I do think there's time to take a pause and look at the long term and set goals under a framework that makes sense, and there's buy-in nationally. And again, I'm going to give Virginia great credit. I manage external affairs in 9 states, and the one thing that Virginia has is a blueprint, an energy plan, and it's been more perfected each year. The General Assembly has tweaked it. The governors are, I mean, the idea of issuing a 4-year energy plan and a blueprint for Virginia is a Virginia invention that this president has adopted with the Quadrennial Energy Review. So that's a best practice. I think it sets Virginia up to be more successful and more competitive relative to some other states, but still not without challenges if the federal government doesn't recognize early adopters and early game-changing developments that a state's taking.
Thank you. We've reached that time in the program where we're going to answer your burning questions. Things that bother you, things that you've always wondered why, you know, why can't the utility industry do this or whatever. So here's your opportunity to ask the experts. I mean, collectively, you know, there's decades of experience sitting across this dais, so ask a question. And we got people with the mics.
David, this is a question for Pam. Pam, the nuclear generation we have here in the state is from time to time takes some hits in the process as far as whether that's a safe alternative given the earthquakes and other things. The other problem, though, it seems to be we don't seem to have a national policy for how we're ever going to safely store the spent nuclear fuel, and I think, as if I understand this right, it's stored on site. Is there any limitation in the state as far as our continued safe operation of our existing nuclear facilities here in the state as to how many years of storage we have? I just never see that in the press. How many years can we store that spent fuel on site? Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, right now our plan is to continue to store the spent fuel on site until there's a national alternative. So there's not a number of years after which it's a problem. But thank you for bringing up the concept of new nuclear. I mean, clearly we would not obtain a license from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission unless they were 100% confident that a new reactor could continue to be operated safely, and none of us would operate nuclear reactors unless they could be continued to operate safely. We do believe there's a future for nuclear generation here in the United States. And at Dominion, we haven't made a decision to build new nuclear, but we are seeking to obtain a new construction operating license for a potential new reactor at our North End Power Station.
Next question.
Yes, this may be for Pam, but anybody on the panel. I recently reviewed a report by Arlington County on their energy plan, and one of the elements is district energy. With nuclear, which isn't near metropolitan areas, you have a significant drop-off of energy, 50 to 60% drop-off by the time it gets to the municipality. Are any of you working on district energy with Arlington or with some of the major metropolitan areas in the state?
You know, some of my colleagues within Dominion are working with the localities. I personally am not up to speed on that. I'd be happy to get with you after to try to get you some information if you like.
One of the things that faces the utility industry is investment. And we are intensely capital. Did I say that right? Capital intensive. Let's do it the other way. Our transmission grid is old. I mean, some of these transmission grids have been 60, 70 years. Dominion's spending billions of dollars trying to get theirs. AEP's doing the same. But when you're doing these environmental rules, trying to do carbon, it robs of making those investments because you got to parcel where your billions go. And that's what we're talking about. It's billions. How do you get more efficiency across the grid when you've got to invest in other things as mandated by the federal government that you have got to do, because it's a mandate, when you know that your grid system continues not to be invested in with the latest technologies? And that's the balancing act that occurs in a utility as they try to do all things for all people to keep the lights on and your bill affordable. Because you don't get any kudos. I guarantee you, nobody rises up at a Dominion stockholders meeting and say, my God, you know, y'all spent $5 billion on the grid today. I mean, nobody, it's invisible. It's not sexy. It's not a windmill out in the ocean, you know, sitting there and everybody oohs and ahs about it. It's just those transmission lines that everybody thinks is big and ugly. But without a grid system that is efficient, you're not going to get the 80% transmission of electricity, and you're going to have line loss because they've been up a very long time. Does that answer your question?
Well, and the other challenge with distributed generation is you still have to get the source energy to the site. And
looking at is geothermal possibly keep the created in Arlington as well as renewable solar.
But and still, you have to take advantage of every source of energy. You know, solar needs natural gas as a backup. And if you just recognize the difficulty that pipeline companies are having today, siting their facilities to get gas into the state, imagine the challenges of expanding the grid, the pipeline grid, to provide adequate gas to back up renewables on a distributed basis. There are trade-offs with any of those options. I think distributed energy has a great future, but you can't completely get off the grid. There has to be some way of delivering power, gas, or other fuel in order for distributed generation to work.
And another thought on your question, now we're sitting there, that's why I love this kind of panel. Look at the furor that Dominion's caused with a pipeline that is desperately needed. No question. What do you think is going to happen in Arlington if Jim goes and says, we're going to put a pipeline down to feed the soul, whatever? The opposition of citizens who will turn out to oppose that will be in the thousands. So this idea of infrastructure that you've got to have a society to power society in today's environment is just horrendous. People want your electricity to be, you can't see it, you can't taste it, you can't touch it, it's invisible, and nobody's inconvenienced. Look at the transmission line Dominion's throwing across the river because they had to shut down their coal plants. Hampton Roads has got to have energy. It's the largest defense base. Well, if you're not going to generate it, then you got to have transmission to import it. I mean, we as society is going to have to figure out what's important, you know, and how to keep the lights on, because when you're trying to do a distributive generation, you have old infrastructure, it's intermittent. You know, like if you had solar the last week or something like that, you didn't stay in shape, so you have to back up on natural gas or you back up on the grid. But these grids are not designed to have these intermittent solutions come on the grid, off the grid. You know, on the grid, off the grid. The sun comes out and all of a sudden your PVs are just generating like mad. But then the big cloud comes across or a front moves in and then they drop off. All that takes brand new digital, everything to make those grids work, to take that kind of variable load as it comes off. It was never designed for it. It was designed for reliability and transmitting electricity long distance. And now we're asking this elephant to do something else. Long answer, but it's a complicated business.
Thank you.
Question back here?
Hey, Stephen Jordan with IO Sustainability. Two questions. And Mary, first of all, both related to global. How are you feeling that the UN climate change talks are going to affect anything, or will they be material at all in terms of the future here? And secondly, for the rest of the panel, as Governor McAuliffe was talking about bringing a Chinese firm here and then sending it back over there, is the Panamax Canal widening going to have a material effect on energy prices and kind of the costs? Are we going to be able to manage the load that we're anticipating?
To the climate talks, I would say, a lot of what the Clean Power Plan has been doing, both with respect to utilities, but Jim also mentioned the DOE, a lot of the energy efficiency rules that have come out. There's been a real push from the administration to reduce GHG emissions, and I think a lot of that has been part of the build-up to the climate talks to put the U.S. in the best position it can as far as having reduced emissions and looking at it. I will say, for U.S. Chamber policy, we've always said that we have to be looking at international overall global impact of emissions here and what other countries are doing, because we can continue to ratchet down our standards here in this country, but there's China, there's India, there are other countries that are even larger emitters and polluters than us, and that's, carbon is a global issue and problem, so it's important that it be addressed on that stage.
As far as the economic development side, and you asked Panamax shipping, anything that moves goods and services quicker and faster is an advantage to the United States. That's what we do well, is logistics. We beat the Germans in World War II. Logistics is our forte. So I think it's a good thing. The question really does become, as we compete on a national basis for investment, we want to have about a 5-year window of advantage at the port. Charleston is desperately trying to figure out how they're going to dredge. New York City has got bridges they got to raise, and nobody wants to be left out of this world trade agreement that's being out in the Pacific. So at the end of the day, it will increase electricity use because you're bringing these goods and manufacturers back. It's called reshoring. So the reason they come back, because energy has gotten so cheap here because of the revolution in fracking, but it's got to be competitive. And ultimately, whether it be China, India, Brazil, Malaysia, Indonesia, none of these people are worried about carbon. They talk it, but nobody's reducing carbon in these developing countries, which is hard to believe China's a developing country, but it is still got elements of that. And they put on a coal plant a week, every week, 52 coal plants a year go up in China. Last year, year before that, 10 years before that. They are coal intensive. And they've gotten better here lately in the last 2 or 3 years by putting pollution control. But those pictures you see in China of people wearing masks, they do that for a reason, because the air is dirty. They have not invested in these previous coal plants. So trade is good, but it requires more energy. All right, that's it. We got right here.
Thank you so much for taking my question. This is actually directed towards Mr. Dempsey and Mrs. Faggart. Given that the panel has focused a lot on cost effectiveness as well as additional generation, I was wondering what sort of energy efficiency specific plans, given that a lot of the data indicates that that's the easiest and one of the most cost effective ways to reduce demand and perhaps meet some of the Clean Power Plan rules.
I'll take a stab first. First of all, we do have an ongoing energy efficiency plan that was approved in West Virginia, and we have some proposals that were included on our Virginia filing for this year, and a filing we'll do later on this year for some additional energy efficiency programs. What we find with and one of the problems with the EPA's Clean Power Plan and their projections there is you seldom arrive at the efficiency levels that are predicted. An example of one of the things we found is, even though the program we have that's been running for 4 or 5 years now in West Virginia is modest, we struggle to fully subscribe the programs in it. You're giving away free stuff or heavily subsidized things. So as an example, if you have an air conditioning system that's old and inefficient, and I have a program that will give you $2,500 towards installing a new energy efficient system, if I don't have the other $2,500, the program's of little value. So, certainly energy efficiency is an area that we're working on, and there's great room, and as you say, it is the most cost effective, but there are glitches with it, and we're going to have to find other ways to help people because there's a big portion of people out there that you can come almost close to free, and they still can't do it.
Yeah, the only thing I'll add to that is obviously it is an important aspect of the Clean Power Plan, and it's something we all need to get better at. One of the challenges for EPA and for Virginia DEQ is to come up with the rules for the state to be able to take credit for those programs we already do have in place and those programs yet to come. Right now, our DEQ does not have a role in regulating energy efficiency. That's something that's covered by the Virginia Commission. So we need to figure out a way for those of us in Virginia to be able to take credit under the Clean Power Plan for those programs that we have in place or will be putting in place.
Well, for the co-ops, I'll give you a great example. We run energy efficiency programs for industries. We did one for the poultry users. How to get their houses, because think about how much chicken everybody consumes. They come from poultry houses that have all these demands of close temperature control, etc. The one that I am out of town, unfortunately, is going to be for the wine industry. As they're talking about how we can make, we're doing targeted industry energy efficiencies where you bring together the industry and talk about best practices, how to be more efficient user of the energy dollar. And we're finding that's pretty effective, but it's like everything else. They got to take those ideas back to where they come from and apply them. Make an investment, say that I can invest this dollar to save X plus dollars. And that's a hard sell when you're in a competitive market, because those are kind of long-term dollars, and you're trying to make payroll and you're trying to do things. So, we're educating individual industries to try to do that energy efficiency piece.
Secretary Chu made a great point a few years ago. He said that all the emphasis on the appliance efficiency is good, but it's misplaced if that's your primary goal. Because so much of the lost energy in America is as a result of building codes that don't mandate adequate insulation or high efficiency windows or any of those really, truly cost-effective measures that can reduce energy consumption. In fact, he said that the homeowner would be much better off adding 6 inches of insulation than buying granite countertops. But they're going to buy the granite countertops. And so the problem I have, going back to the DOE furnace rule, is that we've got a lot of older, drafty homes in our footprint, and they're going to put this hyper-efficient 92 AFUE furnace in these buildings, and they're not going to save money because the furnace is still going to run all the time. If they had invested in more attic insulation or caulk, for example, they'd save far more money over the long term.
Ladies and gentlemen, that's it. I appreciate the panel. I think it was a good discussion. Hope you all give some.
Thank the panel. Thank the panel very much.